Hello, fight fans. Thank you so much for joining me once again here on HYFNTV. I'm Kyle Dyer, and we're here again on the heels of another UFC fight night that we thought was going to be a heavyweight banger. That could not have been farther from the truth. We'll talk about what happened last Saturday. Also, some MMA news. One of the greatest MMA heavyweights of all time hung up the gloves for the last time this past Saturday, and also The Ultimate Fighter Season 31 coaches were announced. You don't want to miss who those coaches are. Last but not least, UFC 284 is upon us. The super fight, number 1 versus number 2 in the power rankings will face off. We're going to preview that as well. Don't miss a minute, right here, right now, on HYFN TV's Combat Sports Report. UFC Fight Night this past Saturday took place at the Apex in Las Vegas, and it was a late night with the main card not starting until after 1 a.m. Eastern Time. Now, this was due to the fact that the prelims included 4 fights in separate weight classes that were finalist bouts in a tournament called the Road to the UFC, where fighters hailing from all over Asia competed in Singapore with the winners promised UFC contracts. This card was originally planned to take place in Seoul, South Korea. However, an unnamed reason caused the UFC to move the event to the Apex in Las Vegas while holding the original time slot to allow the fans in Asia to enjoy the culmination of the show. The winners of the UFC contracts were Park Hyung-sung of South Korea in the 125-pound flyweight division, Rinya Nakamura of Japan in the 135-pound bantamweight division, South Korea's Lee Jung-young in the 145-pound featherweight division, and India's Anshul Jubli in the 155-pound lightweight division. Keep an eye out for these fighters as they look to make their official UFC debuts in the coming months. Now, the main event of the evening was a heavyweight clash between Derek Lewis and Sergey Spivak, and frankly, this one was over before it really started. After a short period of feeling out the fight on the feet, Spivak got Lewis into a clinch and executed a textbook judo throw, pulling Lewis into a world of hurt into the mat. 5 times Sergey Spivak took Lewis to the mat. 5 times he was able to get back to his feet, but each takedown noticeably took more and more out of the gas tank of Derek Lewis. On the 6th takedown proved to be the final straw that broke the camel's back, as Spivak landed a imperfect position on the demoralized Lewis, sunk in an arm triangle choke, and it was over just 3 minutes into the very first round. Sergey Spivak picked up the biggest win in his young career, jumping 4 spots in the heavyweight rankings to number 8. He now will face some real tests upcoming. I think the fight to make for Spivak, the one that makes the most sense for him, would be a difficult matchup, and that's against number 6, Tom Aspinall. Aspinall is coming off of a severe knee injury that he suffered back in July of 2022, before which he was surging and poised to make a run at the heavyweight strap. If Spivak wants to continue to make a name for himself, a huge test with a fighter like Aspinall is the fight to make. For Lewis, his career is at a crossroads. 3 straight losses, 2 of which in the first round. He has to find a way to get back to the fighter that he once was. He seems to still have the desire to fight if you see how he trains and you listen to what he says. So I think that he needs to get back in the octagon with a striker and get into those bangers that we're used to seeing with him. Maybe somebody like number 8, Jairzinho Rozenstruik, somebody that they could make also on the lower end of the main event of the pay-per-view and let these 2 guys let their hands go. Or you could line them up with somebody lower in the rankings like number 15, Blagoy Ivanov, number 13, Alexander Romanov, and number 14, Jailton Almeida are there, but those are huge trap fights for Lewis at this point. I think both of those guys are excellent grapplers, and they would follow the same blueprint as Spivak. Definitely something Lewis will want to avoid until he can gain some confidence back. Now let's take a look at some MMA news. The MMA world said goodbye to an all-time great heavyweight on Saturday night as Bellator featured Fedor Emelianenko in their main event against heavyweight champion Ryan Bader. A man so good that he was known through most of his career simply as Fedor went out on his shield at the age of 46, suffering a first-round TKO loss, which made Bader the only fighter to beat Fedor twice in his illustrious career. Fedor left his gloves in the center of the octagon with a record of 40 wins and 7 losses, beating some of the best in his career, with wins over Antonio Minotauro Nogueira, Mark Coleman, and Kevin Randleman. Fedor is credited as one of the pioneers of the sport and one of MMA's first true superstars, notably without ever setting foot in a UFC octagon. We wish Fedor the best in his future as an MMA coach and a family man. The UFC made a huge announcement last week as the coaches for the upcoming season of The Ultimate Fighter Season 31 were revealed, and it doubled as an announcement that the notorious Conor McGregor will return as he coaches against Iron Michael Chandler. Don't miss a second of this season, as the always brash McGregor will take every chance that he can to make this season entertaining with his constantly running mouth before the culmination of the season when McGregor and Chandler will meet one-on-one in the octagon. This fight could take place possibly as soon as late August of this year. McGregor makes his return after 2 years away from the octagon, last losing by a TKO due to doctor stoppage against Dustin Poirier at UFC 264. This is when we saw him suffer that brutal compound fracture of the lower leg. This injury required a surgically implanted steel rod to repair and raises questions of how he will respond to the pressure that made Michael Chandler famous. There's only one way to find out, and that we will later on this year when the two clash in a battle where you won't want to blink. Stick with us now as we take a look at the main event this Saturday, the super fight at UFC 284. The second UFC pay-per-view of 2023 is upon us as UFC 284 takes place Saturday, February the 11th in Perth, West Australia, and it will be headlined by not only two champions, but number one and number two on the power rankings, number one being featherweight champion Alexander Volkanovski, and number two on the power rankings, the lightweight champion Islam Makhachev. This fight has all kinds of crazy written all over it, and where do I start? Volkanovski has one of the most incredible gas tanks in the business today. This guy simply is not capable of getting tired. We've seen him go 5 rounds and win twice against one of the most decorated high-volume output strikers in the UFC in the last 10 years, Max Holloway. We've seen him demoralize the unshakable Korean zombie Chan Sung Jung. We've seen him weather the storm that is the jiu-jitsu of Brian Ortega in a fight when Volkanovski was locked into a vicious top-mount guillotine choke. His head was turning red from the pressure of the blood being cut off from his brain, but refused to tap and somehow outlasted Ortega's grip, escaping danger, only to moments later be locked into a triangle choke and expertly defend and escape from that as well. For those of you who don't know, Brian Ortega goes by the moniker T-City because his triangle choke is so lethal, and Alexander the Great was able to escape it. That's how incredibly good this guy is. He cleaned out the 145-pound division with ease. But the test that he has upcoming in the main event this weekend will be anything but easy, as Islam Makhachev presents a whole new set of skills that Volkanovski has never faced. Islam is an above-average striker with vicious ground and pound and submission skills, easily the most complete fighter Volk has ever faced, and perhaps the most complete fighter in the UFC. Makhachev is a protege to arguably the greatest fighter in UFC history, Khabib Nurmagomedov, and he does all of the same things well that Khabib did. Though, we see some of the talking heads in the industry, most notably Daniel Cormier, saying that Islam might actually be better than Khabib someday, so that's high praise. When he gets you to the ground, it's extremely difficult to get back up due to his incredible technique, but also his abnormally large size for the lightweight division. Makhachev is one of the biggest weight cutters in the UFC today, rumored to cut as much as 25 to 30 pounds of water in the week leading up to his fights, including about half of that in the 36 hours leading up to the official weigh-in. So what that means is that he typically would weigh around 170 to 175 pounds in the octagon just one day after weighing in at approximately 155 pounds. This translates to a huge advantage on fight day, especially against a guy like Volkanovski, who usually fights lighter and won't be cutting as much weight, thus putting less on before actually stepping into the octagon. I think this is going to be the X factor in this fight. Don't be surprised if we see an extremely competitive fight early on, as Volkanovski has incredible speed and conditioning. But as this fight goes, expect Makhachev to begin wearing him down and controlling him on the mat, racking up that ground control time and striking numbers. I look for this one to go the distance, with Makhachev picking up the win. And that's it for us this week on the Combat Sports Report here on HYFN-TV. Remember, if you don't catch us live on HYFN, you can always catch us on demand, HYFNTV.com, or on your Roku device.